And yeah, it is time for another workshop. So this afternoon, we are covering mapping your world. And I'm not going to lie to you, this is going to be a deeper dive into some of the wilder things that maps can be. So like, it's not just going to be me sitting here explaining to you like how to put a legend on your map or like where to put your compass rose or anything like that. We are going deep into some of the wilder, weirder, and potential and like really exploring the potential of what maps can do, not just for your game, but for like telling your story, confusing your players, the whole bit. So it's going to be a lot of fun. To do this, using a new function here where I'm going to be sharing my PowerPoint stuff here directly, which should work. We'll see here in a moment. So I'm down in the corner. You can see everything. Fantastic. All right, let's go with mapping your world. Okay, so we're going to start with the introduction. Whoa, wait, why did it skip the introduction? We need to do contents first. There we go. So contents. Over the course of the next 2 hours, we're going to be doing an introduction. So just quick let you know about myself, my background, where I'm coming at from all this sort of thing, the knowledge base that I'm drawing on. Then we're going to go into what is a map, which is a far more loaded question than you may think it is right now. Then we're going to go into communicating location, space, and time, followed by showing how to show mechanics of the map. So you've got, game mechanics, you've got maps, you can communicate some of those game mechanics with your maps. Next up is telling stories with a map. Kind of fun, a little out there for some people. We're going to get into it. Finally, we're going to talk about cultural communication. So what are you communicating with your map, the cultural information that's going to be coming out of that. And finally, we're going to go into how to design a map. And that'll be a bit more of the nuts and bolts, but even still a little bit abstracted compared to what you may be expecting. So an introduction, who am I? My name is Graeme Barber. I'm the writer and managing director of pscgamer.com. I do freelance writing and narrative design for role-playing games, and recently become a game designer. Like over 2020, I've actually started making my own games and continuing to do so in 2021. I got my start in the industry doing critical analysis of world building and racism in games. And I just realized that I copy pasted this introduction and forgot to change the information. Oh, awesome. Good start. So we only have 2 hours. There will be a bathroom, at least one bathroom break involved in all of this. And this is not going to be a limited depth introduction. This is going to be an in-depth dive into some of the stuff about map making. So I'm just going to change up to what is a map to get that erroneous slide off of there, and just quickly talk about my background with this stuff. So mapping wise, maps are actually what I do as my regular job when I'm not doing role-playing stuff. I am a GIS technician. I do a lot of mapping work, adjudication work, and some analysis work with maps. It's sort of what I do. And so I've got a huge breadth of knowledge concerning GIS mapping and all that sort of thing. I also have a background in archaeology and anthropology, which helps bring a lot more information into this about like what maps can do, be, and all that sort of fun stuff. So hammering in right away. Oh, and also, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. I am monitoring the chat as it's going along. So if you have any questions, fire them up and I will answer them as they are coming. So what is a map? Typically, we use them as just like a way to navigate. The maps that most people are used to are ones like the ones that are just above me right now up here. And these are respectively a navigational chart that is directly above my head, the sort that I would use if I was out operating a commercial vessel or something like that. That's giving me the depths and the depths of water, and some landmarks, piers, all that sort of thing. And then just a little further over there, we have a map from, I believe this was 2018 or 2019's air index, air quality indexes for all the fires we had in British Columbia. And so right away, we see two things that people use maps for: navigation, getting around, and also to convey other types of information by giving them a spatial component. And by spatial, I mean we're putting it on the Earth somewhere. So this is all good. This is a great start. And I mean, like, past these, a lot of people will be familiar with topographic maps. So like military style maps with satellite maps, satellite imagery, things like Google Earth. And you'll also, like the most common maps people are probably familiar with now are Google Earth, or not Google Earth, Google Traffic Maps, like the Google navigation app and the maps that Google Maps makes. Okay, that's huge and it's useful. And it's only a little bit about what maps can actually be, because maps have space, time, cultural aspects, all sorts of things like that. And what makes a map can vary wildly. So what you see now behind me are two real world maps. These are the sorts of things that are used by people. On the far side, oh, there we go. I'm learning which way to point here because I'm mirrored. So on the far side, we have the London Tube map. Okay, that's the London Underground. Okay, it is a fantastic map. It is beautiful. It conveys a ton of information. It tells you what stations are on what lines, and gives you an idea of how you can navigate through the system. But okay, if you take a look at it, you'll see that it does not care about space. Like the spatial component, aside from making sure everything is in the correct order, is absent. Okay, they're not paying attention to how many meters, kilometers, or anything else like that are between any of these points. Because the purpose of the map is just to show you where all those points are. All right, so it's a very abstracted map. Still a map, very abstracted. And then directly above my head, this is a TO map. And the TO map was something that was used for like quick reference or like the conceptualization of the world in medieval Europe. And so right away you can see there's some pretty serious changes from like what we might consider to be normal. First off, north is not at the top of the map, and that was something that didn't start happening until relatively recently. Like we're talking 19th century was when north became the predominant top of the map. So you've got Asia is on top. Then you have Europa and Africa, and then the T separating them is actually the Mediterranean between Europe and Africa, and then the Nile, and I forget the other river. Maybe it's the Rhine or the Blue River, the Danube. Not sure. Anyways, that's a couple of rivers that separate Europe and Africa from Asia. Super abstracted, really different. These are still maps, and something that's actually absent off of this particular TO map is that the center of the earth was considered at that point to be Jerusalem, which is a piece of cultural information that's coming out of this as well. And so yeah, things are already starting to get a little bit weird, a little bit unusual. Oh, there we go. And maps are so many things. So here we have again two different types of maps conveying very different information. So the far map, way over there, is a heat map, and it's showing world populations. The more glowy lights there are, the more people there are, and the more densely populated that area is. It's not really paying attention to space too much. It's a Mercator projection, and so projection is how you try to flatten the Earth to make it look like to make it readable. So you can tell it's a Mercator projection because Greenland is huge, and so is Europe in comparison to all the other places. But this map isn't here to convey spatial information for navigational purposes. It's here to convey how many people live where in a fast visual manner. Now, the map right above my head, That is a Marshall Islands stick map. Okay, so that is a map for navigating between islands. Okay, and I'm not going to try to make anything up and tell you like I understand this map and I know what's going on and how to use it, because I have no clue. It's tracking waveforms, like literal waveforms on the ocean. It's tracking the locations of islands. It's tracking currents. And there's a few other things. And each one of these maps was made more or less custom by the person who was going to be using it. So by the Marshall Islands navigators. So coming into this immediately, this is something that I want to convey, is that maps can be so much more than just the things that we usually associate them with being. So I'm going to flip to the next one here. Oh, man. My mouse has got some issues. So communicating location, space, and time. So location, space, and time, these are, broadly speaking, the big things that maps are there to communicate. And these are things that you need to pay attention to when you're designing your map for your world. Okay? Because you'll be communicating these things at different levels, with different emphases, and even with different biases, depending on what you're working on. And so in the background here is a map of Strange Reel. And if you've never heard of that, I can understand that, because it is the planet on which the Ace Combat series of video games happens on. So it's a game about fighter pilots and all that sort of fighter jets, all that sort of thing. It is an alternate Earth, a reimagined Earth style world. And the information that's passing on is the sort of information that is important to that particular game. Okay? In that it's a modern military style world map. You can see everything's been broken down into grids. We're really paying attention to the spatial component of it, like the space, and the actual locations are a little bit de-emphasized on this, because it's not super concerned with the minutia. It just wants you to know that you're flying from Osea to Yukobanya, Yuktabanya, there we go. And what happens in between is going to be the individual levels. Okay, so it's communicating a lot of location stuff. Not a lot of location stuff, a lot of space stuff, and probably a lot of time as well, because it's paying attention to how long it's going to take to get between those different locations. Okay, now, these maps will be familiar to anybody who's a big Zelda fan, and these are the maps from Zelda: A Link to the Past. And I love these maps. These maps are, to me at least, the primary example, or they're a primary example of how to mix location and space well in a map in order to drive your story and drive the adventure that's happening. And what I mean by that is that these maps, on the surface, it seems like space isn't an issue. I mean, after all, like this is supposed to be the entire nation of Hyrule, and the you've got your light world, dark world, which is some cool story telling stuff going on right away. But there's more. Okay, so it's driving location. So you have important locations are really obvious on the maps right away, but it's also communicating out that the space between those locations is important as well. And this is something that can be very hard to do, because a lot of the time, when people, including myself, think about maps, like I think topographic maps, I think like big world spanning maps, I think about, I have to make sure that the space between all these locations is correct, and that everything's all laid out all right and all that sort of thing. But that's not the case. You don't have to do that, especially for a game. Okay? You don't have to do that. Like this is a fantastic, what I call hybrid map. And it tells you, yeah, these places are important to go to, but the space between them is also important to traverse, because stuff's going to be happening there that's going to help prepare you for going to these going up to the next location, the next space. Yes. And getting into the layout that's used on these maps, the layout again is used to communicate what play or sorry, hang on, I'm just gonna get my thoughts in order here. The layout is used to communicate not just what places are important or where they are, but also to effectively grid out the map without using a grid. So if I flip back one thing here, oh, there we go. Okay, I go back to the map of Strange Reel here, and you can see this is all manually, or not manually. This is all, the grids are all drawn out. So there's grids, subgrids. Looks like they've even got some weather patterns going on and everything else like that. Those little swoopy lines going on. Hey, these maps are gridding themselves. Hey, like you look at it and you can immediately see, oh, okay, so there's a forest, a big mountain, a waterfall area going along the top. There's a village, the castle, some sort of hill area in the center, a desert, what looks like a graveyard, and then some water in the middle. Oh, satellite paths. There we go. Thank you very much, the Dapper Streamer. Yeah, those satellite paths on the last one. Didn't even occur to me that they'd be satellite paths. Probably because I don't play a lot of Ace Combat. Anyways, so this map also naturally grids itself out, and that's awesome, because when you can convey that sort of information without actually drawing extra things onto your map, that's always good. And the reason that's always good is because the more information you put onto a map, the more cluttered it becomes, and the more cluttered a map becomes, the more difficult it becomes for the end user to put to use. Okay, I have seen some absolutely horrific maps in my day where they are like a cacophony of color, shapes, shading, and you look at it and you're just like, I don't know what I'm looking at or what the most important part of this is. So when you look at these maps, you see immediately where the important parts are, where the natural breaks between things are. It's fantastic. Now, moving on to a map where space does not matter, only location. This is the map. This is a map of Third Earth from the original Thundercats cartoon. And it is a perfectly functional game map. It's also a perfectly functional world map, provided you don't actually care about the space or time between any of the things that are on it. So, I mean, you've got the Cat's Lair, you've right above my head, you've got Mumra's pyramid. And the whole thing is, it's built to convey that in this world, or in the terms of like, if you're using this sort of thing to be a map for your game, you'd be saying, look, in this game, I do not care about space. It doesn't need it. Not required. The important part of this map are the places on it. And that's where the adventures are going to happen. That's where the events are going to happen. Everything else is just a matter of you saying, right, we get into our Thunder Tank and drive. Now we're here. Now the adventure commences. And the thing is that, like, these maps can be looked down on because we are so very indoctrinated, so very taught, like what a map is, what a map has to be, how it has to operate, and how it needs to be, because we see certain types of maps all the time, and so we expect certain types of information from maps all the time. But a map can be virtually anything as long as it's conveying vaguely locations, and we'll get into that more a little bit later with another awesome real world example of a map. And finally, we have this this map. So this is a map of Alexandria. This was made in Wonderdraft. I got this off of Reddit. It's a beautiful, beautiful map. So you've got Taldore on one side, and you've got the new Wildmount area just above my head. Really beautifully laid out, very traditional style map. And this is where space has been prioritized over location. And what I mean by that is that, pardon me, a lot of attention has been paid to the amount of space between things. And this is done by reducing the amount of locations that are shown on the map. So it's only the major locations that are going to be on it, and major geographical features. And it's prioritizing the space because it wants to communicate that it's an entire world, and that it's an entire world like a world that you may already be familiar with. And that the adventure that's happening in this world is going to be happening in that space. Now, yeah, sure, it might happen in a location that's on the map, like it's going to happen in a geographical location, like in the mountains of something or other, in the forests of what have you. But it's not actually dropping a pin on those points and saying this is where you need to be. Yeah, I've got a comment here. Yeah, that's a really good point. If the travel isn't an issue, if you have fast travel or a game is more episodic, then the geography doesn't need to be exact. Exactly. It doesn't have to be. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And yeah, this map is a map that's presented where it is shown to be important. And it's fine. Like all of these maps. So Alexandria, Third Earth. Need to get this mouse under control. It's double clicking. Third Earth, Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past. Okay, all these maps are all communicating out what's important to the particular games or worlds that they're associated with. And what I really want you to take away from this is that when you are making your game map, like when you're building your map, you can scale it for what you need and what's important in your game or in your like for your sessions. Okay, so like if you've made like an awesome world, like you watched the world building workshop yesterday and you're all excited, you've sat down, you've started working on this amazing world, and you're like, oh wow, like I really need a map. Okay, what I encourage you to do is stop and think, like, what am I going to be doing this with this world? How am I going to be presenting it to my players, to my end users, and how can I best put that into map form? Because if you don't need to, like, if something like what's behind me right now, these awesome Link to the Past maps, is going to work for you, that is so much less heartache to create than creating a map like this one for Alexandria. And if you're doing a highly episodic style of game, or if your game's designed to be highly episodic where like space doesn't matter and you just need to get the players to the location, end of story, then this sort of map, this Third Earth style map, this is going to be your go-to. Yeah, sure, it vaguely shows where there's forests and mountains and a volcano, and like quite honestly, there's a lot of very, very hazardous terrain on this map, like an alarming amount. But it's communicating out where things are going to be happening and telling your players, hey, this is what's going to be important. This is where you need to be. Don't worry about the little details in between. And please remember, I strongly, strongly encourage you to, if you've got questions, comments, anything like that, please put them into the chat. I want to hear them. I want to see them because like it is, I've worked it into the time for this. I don't think I could talk for 2 straight hours. Well, I probably could. Just talk continuously. So please fire your questions up. Now, showing mechanics with maps. This may seem like a bit of a weird one because maps are usually associated with being just like we use them for travel, but you can also communicate out a lot of the mechanics of the game or adventure using a map to do so. And the first example of that I have is good old Chult. So Hang on a moment. Better. So, Chult is a Chult was re-released by Dungeons and Dragons for 5th edition as part of the Tomb of Annihilation adventure. As part of that, it came out with what, in my opinion, is probably the most beautiful maps that have been made for 5th edition so far, in that they came out in a variety of different styles, with a mind for end users, being both the dungeon master and the players. But also they communicated out the mechanics of the game absolutely delightfully. And so what I have here beside me is an example of, am I pointing the right way? Nope, there we go. No, I'm pointing the right way. So what I have here is an example of the Dungeon Master's map. And so, yeah, I guess spoilers if you haven't played this yet. Don't look away from your screen. Just don't read it too hard. So on this map is trying to communicate a lot of information out very quickly. Okay, so just what we've talked about in the last little bit, it is communicating out topography and spatial information. Got a question here. Do you think the art or aesthetic is equally as important in conveying information to the user? Yes, for a variety of reasons. It tells you a lot about the art and aesthetic. Will tell you, will pass on a lot of cultural information if it's like a professionally made map or something like that. If it's something that somebody has written out, it's going to show it's going to tell you what they think is important and how to get around it. And it also falls into like thematic and story building elements as well. For example, incomplete maps, partially hand drawn maps, all that sort of stuff. It's not just communicating out the spatial information. It's communicating out how accurate the map's going to be, what the people who made it consider to be important, all that sort of stuff. So there's, art and aesthetic are equally important in conveying information. Yes. And got another one. My kid would like to ask a question. Which style of map that you've shown so far takes more time to create? Okay, of the ones that I've shown so far, I would say that probably this map for Chult and this map for Alexandria were the ones that were taking the most time to create. There's a lot of nitty-gritty detail that went into them, and that because they're paying so much attention to space and location and topography and all that sort of stuff, they're going to require a lot more effort than this map, which is relatively like the Strange Rail map, which is relatively simple to make because it's mostly just outlines and labeling. These maps, which while they do convey a lot of information, are done in a much more simplified form. Or this one, where it's just basically it's the time to draw is the time that it is the effort that went into this one. So yeah, it would definitely be Chult or Alexandria would be the most difficult and longest to take the longest to create, in my opinion, as someone who has to make maps at work. So back onto this Chult one, it is communicating out locations. So we have Port Nyanzaru and Fort Balurian up top. So we actually, Kitcher's Inlet, all that sort of stuff. So we have city and settlement locations, pretty normal, but it's also communicating out event and adventure locations at the same time. So we got all these little skulls and crossbones going on, mine locations. So, where there's issues in mines, all that sort of stuff. And then it goes further, because not only is it communicating out location points of interest, and event locations, all that sort of stuff on it, it's also reinforcing the use of space by being a hex map, because a component of that game, or sorry, not that game, a component of that adventure was the hex crawl. It was a big part of going to Chult was the hex crawl component of it, because in order to reinforce the claustrophobic, easy to get lost aspects of Chult, they wanted you to actually navigate through it. They didn't want the fast nav style adventure like what you'd see using a Thundercats style map, that was the Third Earth style map that we looked at earlier. And they also wanted the space to be more arduous to cross than, say, for the Link to the Past maps we were looking at earlier. Okay, this is a setting where the space was also an intrinsic part of the adventure, and so the map is reinforcing that by showing you, like, yeah, like this is a hex. And if it were more zoomed in, you would see that all these little hexes are actually numbered, and the idea is that you'd actually go through, and depending on how you navigate, each adventure you had there could potentially be different, because you might not hit the same locations you hit the first time you went through, which is fantastic and adds more to the game, provided you use that mechanic, which they're trying to reinforce using these hexes. And sticking with hexes, so this is a map I made. I used there's a fantastic program for Traveler that lets you create system maps and world maps. So this is a world map that I created using it, and it is doing a lot of things all at once. Not necessarily obviously. And okay, we got another question here. Grid question. Do you find there are specific advantages, disadvantages to using square versus hex grids? I like to use hex for exteriors and squares for interiors, and I'm wondering if there's a reason besides I like it. The primary advantage of using hexes for exterior, or for maps, is when you do stuff like what I'm looking at right here on this Traveler map. Hexes work better when you are trying to create an isocahedral style map, because you're trying to save space. And what I mean by trying to save space is that if you take a sphere and you flatten it out, it tears, obviously. Like if you've ever ripped apart an orange peel and laid it out flat, it's not going to look like it's not going to look like a nice round orange peel. And that's where projections for maps come into things. And so what a map projection does is it makes sure that it doesn't make sure. It tries to present the ground in a way that's best suited for specific purposes. So for example, the Mercator Projection, which the Alexandria map, for example, we looked at, is a good example of. So I'll flip back to that. Oh, too far. There we go. So the Alexandria map, this is sort of a Mercator projection. And what that means is that the further you get away from the equator, the less accurate size becomes on it. Because unless the world is flat, you're flattening out that sphere, and it's beginning to exaggerate features. Okay, so in a real world map, that's why Greenland is giant. Like Greenland looks like it's larger than looks like it would fill up a significant part of Canada or the United States, but in reality, Greenland is not that big. But because of the distortion that happens, because of the Mercator projection, you get that weird distortion happening. But jumped ahead too far. But when you use hexes, you can make isocahedral shaped maps like this one, where distance and actual size is still kept. It's just you have blank areas between them. Sorry, I'm just reading the comments. These comments are great. So yeah, that's why hexes work well for outside, and also they give you a more visually appealing, at least in my opinion, method of navigating, as opposed to squares, which it kind of looks like a chessboard, especially when you're making fantasy maps or science fiction maps. However, squares, if you're running a military style game, especially one that's theater of the mind, squares will generally work better because they'll work better with grid style stuff. Yeah, I just noticed all the traveler. Yeah, it was all the borders lining up, so it forms. Yeah, yeah. If you fold, yeah, if I were to cut this out, print this out, and cut it up, and leave a couple of tabs on everything so that I could glue it all together. Yeah, it would form a little isohedral map. Like it'd be a little semi-sphere. Squares are really good for interior stuff, largely because if you're getting into running combat, it is easier to use. People tend to have an easier time visualizing squares. I've only played one game that used hexes for all of its combat and world stuff, and that was Heavy Gear, and they really took some effort to make it work. Another question. I vaguely remember something in math class about hexagons being the most highly connected regular polygon that tiles plane. Yeah, absolutely. Hexagons work well together because they don't leave gaps, and they can replicate spherical shapes. So they have that capacity, which is pretty cool. But back onto what this map is communicating. So you've got the name of the world, Nanjiri 2, system. The name of the world, Nanjiri 2. It's 5685 in the Nijtru Gulf. That T shouldn't have been there. It's typo, whatever. Anyways, but what mechanics is this communicating? Well, up in the corner here, you have, so right up there, at the very top, you have the universal world profile. And if you're familiar with the Traveler series of games, much more so than I am, and you have that memorized, that will actually tell you a whole bunch of information about the world, its political climate, freedoms, geography, hydrography, atmosphere, all that sort of stuff. And then beside it, it's got trade classification, classifications and remarks. So that's awesome. That's game mechanics right there. There's more game mechanics though, because it's also a hex, even though it's abstracted. So unlike the map of Chult, which was paying attention to the real coastlines and real shapes of things. Okay, this one is abstracted. It's just a straight hex, and that hex is going to be land, water, mountain, what have you. But it also has locations on here. So we've got noble estates, the starport, towns, all that sort of good stuff. Got precipices. Not sure why those are there, but, and of course the scale. So it's this is what, 1,000 kilometers, something like that. Actually, I'm curious about that now. I didn't. Oh. Okay. So that's scale. So it has a scale hex down there to let you know that the scale for the whole map is at wow, I have to zoom in on it here on my computer in order to see it. Yeah, 1,000 kilometers. So scale's 1,000 kilometers per hex. So it's pretty, relatively big size world. And that's all stuff you can manipulate it. But the point is that this map's communicating a bunch of stuff about travelers' mechanics. It's saying hex crawling is going to be higher, you're going to be traveling when you actually get onto the planet. It's saying that it wants to try to retain the actual natural shape of the planet and land masses on it without exaggerating them too badly. And that the primary locations you're going to are clearly labeled on the map right away. And that's because Traveler is a game that prioritizes the travel to a location, stuff at the location, then travel away from it. Comment here, Breath of the Wild has a pretty awesome feature that allows you to mark up the world map, running symbols to note enemies, points of interest. Have you experienced any games that incorporate cartography into gameplay? Minecraft, actually. Making maps in Minecraft, it can become a very consuming activity very quickly. You can't mark them up, but you can actually create them, which is nice. And there's also what's it? I'm just trying to think about games, because a lot of games incorporate maps, but the challenge is finding games that incorporate maps in a meaningful way. Because obviously there's games like Dungeons and Dragons, my old favorite, Heavy Gear, all that sort of stuff, where maps are considered a key component of the game, and they're done in different ways. For example, in Heavy Gear, maps are provided and are immediately available. If you're rolling old school in Dungeons and Dragons, some awesome player at the table is tasked as being the mapper as you explore the dungeon, and you actually map all that stuff out manually. But I don't beyond Minecraft, I don't have a lot of experience with games that actually include an active cartography component, where you're actually doing something, making a map or doing something with a map, that isn't simply revealing it as you move on. Oh, okay, yeah. Apparently there's a game called Etrian Odyssey where you did some map making. Well, that's cool. I've actually been looking at. I've got a DS that I still buy games for, so I'm gonna keep that in mind for later. So, what we've covered so far in all this, because we're coming up on our first break here, so that everyone can go to the washroom, relax, chill out, and stuff for a few minutes. We've covered so far in this, so I just zoom back, is that maps can be a lot of things. They can be presented in a lot of different ways, and that they're communicating location, space, and time for the most part, but do so in ways that are wildly different depending on what the focus of the actual map is and what the end use of that map is within the context of its game or show or whatnot. And what I want to emphasize at this point is that there is no single right or perfect way to make a map. It is entirely dependent, in the terms that we're working with here, like for games and stuff like that. It's entirely dependent on your needs, the needs of the game, and how you want that map to help propel the game forwards. And what we can see right away here is that you have the map of Third Earth. This is for propelling the game forward in an episodic manner. Space does not matter, where the location matters. Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. Space is sort of important. Location is still more important. Oh, come on. There we go. Alexandria. Space is very important. Location, not as important, because the adventures will be happening in those larger spaces at times to be defined later. And then, of course, what we've just been talking about, which is reinforcing your actual mechanics through using maps. So we have this beautiful hex crawling map from Dungeons and Dragons' Tomb of Annihilation campaign, which just communicates out so much stuff and reinforces so many mechanics at once that it's easy to forget that it's also like a beautiful map in general. And then finally, our traveler map here, where it's highly abstracted, but is still communicating out what's important for the game, how you're going to be getting around, what you're going to be doing, and all that sort of fun stuff. So we got time for one more quick question here before our first washroom break. Does anybody have any burning questions they want to get off their chest right now? Or does everyone just sort of want to take 5 and be right back? Let's give it a few seconds here. Yeah, love this traveler map. So simple. And yeah, absolutely fun. Like if you've got kids or something like that and you've been playing Traveler and printing these sorts of maps out, yeah, you can straight up like cut them out, leave little tabs off the sides of the map, and yeah, they can glue them together. Just a lot of fun. I had a buddy who did that. It was pretty cool. All right, so no questions have popped up. Oh, hang on. Yeah, question. Where do you start with making your own maps? A region or a whole world? I strongly recommend that you start out with a region. Start out with the area that you need immediately and the environs immediately around that. and then have an idea about what the rest of the world is going to look like as your world expands. And the reason I recommend that is because while it is tempting to, absolutely tempting to create like an entire planet level map, if you're not going to be using that whole planet level map right away, you're going to be setting yourself up for a lot of work right off the hop that could actually like decrease your enthusiasm for world building or getting it done. So my recommendation is always that you start with a one hyper detailed region, and that's like your starting location. Have some less detailed areas going out around that, where you like like there's the land features, maybe some locations, that sort of thing, and then it simply becomes more skeletal as you move out from there. And then as your players advance out through it, you can expand it as needed. Plus, if you do that and you then suddenly find yourself with a lot of time to actually make a full-on map and like do the entire world, you've already got a bunch of the rough sketch stuff out, and you'll already have a nice bump of confidence from having completed that first region. And so it makes it easier to start expanding out. So hope that answer helps. So I'll see everybody back here. It's 4:46 my time. So take 5. I'll be right back, and we'll carry on with how to tell a story with a map. All right. So, yeah, that feels way better. Also, I got some toddler hugs, which was nice. My daughter came running over to say that she missed me, loved me, and that she wanted some rice crackers. So, yeah, good break all around. So, where do we leave off? All right. So, we were talking about how game mechanics can be reinforced by maps. Now we're going to talk about how to tell a story with a map. So behind me is a map that is near and dear to my heart. This is the map from the game Golden Axe 2. So, and this is the only map. This is the only map that I've got for this section. Just this map of Golden Axe 2. Why? Because you can right away see that there is a story happening right away. You look way off in the distance, and there's a little village in a forest, which leads to some hills, which leads to what looks like some ruins, which leads to like some sort of like volcano cavern adventure. And then there's battling your way through a fortress up to the top where I assume, what with the giant evil looking bat. Well, not that I assume, I know. Giant evil looking bat, that the main bad guy's up there, and that is where the climax is going to be happening. This is awesome. It is a story, and maps can tell stories, especially when you're using a map that is location focused. I mean, we talked earlier, how the Thundercats map was fantastic for episodic play, and it was, but there's no real story associated with it. It's a lot of locations on a map, letting you know where they are. Got some pretty cool sounding names, like Chasm of Death and stuff like that, which is awesome, but there's no story. This map is location heavy, but it's also telling the story of the game. Okay, it's telling you the story that it would assume that you would get through if you had enough quarters to get enough lives to fight through everything, to fight Death Adder, the final boss up at the top. And this is something that I love about maps, and something that I find we often don't do enough with our maps in role-playing games. Okay? We forget about the storytelling part of it, and that it's something that can be done. And so it's nice sometimes to let go of that spatial component, to let go of the assumption that you need to have like high-end satellite level spatial accuracy when you can do it tell a story at the same time. Another way you can tell stories with maps is by writing on them, and that's something that was brought up earlier by Annotate. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm probably not, but they talked about how Breath of the Wild has an awesome feature where you can mark up the world map. Okay. Most people have seen at this point some sort of like World War II movie or something like that, and have seen like arrows moving around and like seen fronts shifting and stuff like that on some sort of map or map board. Again, storytelling. You're telling a story about what's happening on the ground using a map that pays attention to more to space, and you do it by marking it up, by drawing all over it. I mean, I still have maps personally from my overseas experiences with the Canadian Forces, where I still have notes on these maps of places that were safe, places that weren't, places where events happened, all sorts of stuff like that. And looking back on them, it's like an immediate trip down memory lane. It's like, oh yeah, like I remember this day. Oh yeah, I remember when that happened. Oh yeah, I remember when we got the word that this area wasn't an inactive Soviet minefield. It was an active, recently laid minefield. All that sort of stuff. So maps can tell a story, and sometimes that story will be told immediately. Like it's the sort of thing that's going to happen right away, like with this map. Other times it's going to be a story that you look back on. So like you finish a big campaign and your players have marked up a map all over the place. That map is now a story. It's telling the story of that adventure, what happened, where they went, what went down, all that sort of good stuff. And so it's one of those things that I strongly recommend people do, is like, if you have maps, write on them. Make that map yours, take notes, have all that sort of fun stuff. So, and that's I think that's about all I have to say about telling stories with maps, unless anyone has any questions about that. And as I said before, if you have questions, please fire them up, because we've got another, well, at least scheduled, we have another hour and 5 minutes. And yeah, I've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, I got like 4 slides left after this one. Oh, there we go. I swear I will get better with this Zoom stuff. So, cultural communication. I've brought this up a few times now, and it sounds like a nebulous term, but it's not as nebulous as you might think. And what I mean by that is that maps can contain a lot of cultural information while containing spatial information or not, or while containing location information or not. It just depends on the culture that's generating them. So the 2 maps that have popped up behind me are 2 really great ones. Oh, thank you very much, Yoda P. Skywalker. I will keep trying to keep on with this. So these are 2 of my favorite maps as far as cultural communication goes, because A, they're beautiful, and B, they pass on so much cultural information. And what do I mean by that? Well, the yellow map that you see immediately up to the off in the distance there, this is a map from China in antiquity. This is a Tang Dynasty map, and it's described as a celestial and celestial, so Earth and stars map. So it's called the map of heaven and earth, and it's giving a spatial collaboration between big cities, mountains, and rivers down on the earth, so like in China, in the Middle Kingdom, and the major planets, stars, and constellations in the sky. This map does not care about distance. It's not here to map out how far you're going to get between all these places. It doesn't even have it just it's got some boundaries put onto it, but there's no drawn mountains or anything else like that. Everything's all written in, and it's connecting heaven to earth. This is fantastic cultural information. This is stuff that was important to these people at this time, okay? And it was something they mapped out so that it would be so that people could quickly and effectively reference that information. It's phenomenal. And then directly over my head here is the TO map. But if you recall, so let me flip back a little bit here to the original TO map. Oh, too far. There we go. So above my head now is the original TO map. So you can see Asia's on top. So it's east-oriented map. So east is at the top. Got Europe and Africa, some other descriptions going on, all that sort of good stuff. But we come forwards and we see this one, which is described as a modern interpretation and idealized form of the TO map. And this map's the cultural stuff that it's communicating out is not only the information from the era that the map was originally conceived in, but also of the biases and conceptualizations of the world of the person who made the modern idealized version of it. So the first thing, they've rotated it over. It is now a north-oriented map as opposed to being an east-oriented, which is what it was before, which actually made it a T and O map, because now it's like a, I don't know, like tire iron and T-junction tire iron and O map or something like that. Europe is now on top, which is another modern thing that's been developed. Africa is now below it. Asia. They've actually labeled Jerusalem on this one, which is better. And then you've got Oceanus, going around everything a little bit, and they've labeled stuff up a little bit differently. So this is telling you, this is the sort of map that you'll find being generated when somebody looks at an old map and says, you know what? I don't like this. This thing's just doesn't look right. I like the idea, but it needs to be fixed and patched up. And so you get maps like this. And this is something very real that happens as maps pass through time. And it's something, again, I strongly encourage you to do in games, is to remember that no one map is perfect. Yeah, a map is basically a screenshot of a specific period in time, and is already obsolete the minute that, or like within seconds after it's been made. And that maps change through time. Like, not only, I'm not just talking about like geography changes, rivers change course, all that sort of thing, because that absolutely happens. And like, you can have some great fun with in games by giving your players a map, but the map's like from 200 years ago because it's the last map that was made of the area, and then they go out and find out the whole place is wildly different. That can be a lot of fun. But the main thing here is that maps change, maps get updated, people add things to maps. So like, you'll find like, if you look, like I was talking about my maps from doing stuff for the army, they're covered in annotations and information. My maps from diving, same thing, covered in annotations and information. I've got stuff circled, locations, comments, all that sort of thing. All of that can be on a map too, and like should be. Like if you want to make a map feel like worn or used, or like it's actually had some experience and stuff. Well, not the map hasn't had experience, but it's experienced heavy usage. And to remember that people map what's important to them. And I think the next, like the Heaven and Earth map here, is a great example of that. This next one is an even more spectacular example. Now, what this is the oldest known map in the world. Oh, here we go. Question: how do you decide when to annotate a map directly versus providing a key/legend? Wow, that is an awesome question. That's a good one. I think that one depends on the level of. Okay, so first off, as a game master or a person who's running a who's creating the world, absolutely have both. Like, have your annotations like for notes and stuff like that, and have a key/legend on it, just because, you know what, sometimes you'll just have so many symbols on there that you may not remember what they're all about. For maps that are going out to players, or maps that are going out for use, it depends on the level of first off, the level of professionalism of the person who made that map that's going to them. Like, not in terms of like you, like you making the map, but in terms of like, are they getting this map from a cartographer? Are they getting it from somebody who copies maps? Are they getting it, or is it like the hand-drawn map that somebody created later? Like, what's the map's background? And then as far as annotations go, and so that's for keys and legends. And for annotations, I would say that it depends on how heavily the map has been used prior to the map ending up in your player's hands. So if the map is like fresh off the printer, well, fresh off the wood blocks, whatever you've got, whatever sci-fi, fantasy game, whatever, it probably won't have annotations on it, unless it's coming from like a very specific source. So like if you're purchasing somebody's annotated map or something like that. Otherwise, I usually save annotations on maps for when that map's been around the block a few times, and people have written on it, people have added their comments, all that sort of stuff. the comment here. So a map given to the characters by Buddy of the Cartographers Guild should be almost obsessively labeled, while a map drawn by Cletus the Barkeep should be vague at best. Broadly speaking, yes. The thing to remember with cartography and cartographers guilds and all that sort of stuff is that you get what you pay for. So if you're only paying them for the basic level map, you're going to get a basic level map. It'll still be nice. It'll be probably be nicer than the hand-drawn map by Cletus the Barkeep, but it's not going to be obsessively labeled. It's not going to have all the bells and whistles. It's just going to be a basic map, because stuff takes time, and time is money. And so the more obsessively labeled it is, the more expensive it's going to be. Cletus the Barkeep, on the other hand, it may be accurate in terms of like directions to get from point A to point B, hazards that are along the way, all that sort of stuff. But like space and time may be a little vague or a little unclear at best. Because I don't think, like, they're probably not going to put a scale bar on there or anything else like that. So does that answer it? It's mostly true. Like you're going to get a nicer map from one than the other, but the Cartographers Guild is going to be sort of all over the place in terms of what you're paying them for. So this map that's beside me right now, this is sometimes referred to as the Imago Mundi. It is the oldest known map in the world. At I believe they estimate its age is between around 2,500, 2,700 years old. And I'll got a comment here. Spectrum of quality of the country. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're going to have their top end maps for the top end customers, and some super basic level maps for all the other people that come in with a couple of bucks to throw at them. So yeah, so the Imago Mundi here. This is the map of the world. This was it's a Sumerian map, and it is, it's on a cuneiform. It's on a clay tablet you can see it's been reassembled here. We don't have the whole thing. And beside it here, I copied this text right from Wikipedia, as you can see by the little note at the bottom there. From what they've been able to read and identify, these are all the things that it's recognizing. Mountains, cities, Assyria, a swamp, canals, named cities, all sorts, the ocean. It's a map. It's a map that is absolutely not paying attention to space outside of like vague directionality from the center point on it. But it works. And this is, how it all got started, which I think is pretty it's pretty mind-blowing that this is something that exists and something you can go see in a museum right now. But it's sort of what I want this to do in the terms of this, though, is to drive home the point that maps communicate cultural information. The information that's listed here is what the creator of this map, well, specifically whoever commissioned this map, thought was important and was put onto this map to show where things were and all sorts of stuff. But was done so in a manner that is completely abstracted from reality. So next up, we're actually going to start talking now a little bit about how to design a map. So there's a bunch of questions here, and we're going to dig into these because this is the important stuff. So like you want to make it, you've decided, yep, it's time. I am making a map. It's time to fire it up. Oh, another cool map I recently saw. Something. Oh yeah, not maps and that South America's got some wild stuff going on with that. It is fantastic. Fully encourage people to go check that out. obviously after this, like don't leave right now. Like hang out for this last little bit here that I'm covering. But yeah, check out mathematically spaced knots. Yeah, to use for navigation. That's cool. So how to design a map. Oh man. So first question you ask yourself, what are you making the map for? Are you making it to be the world map for an entire world that you've created? Are you making the map for a session? Are you making the map for a campaign? Are you making the map for fun? Are you writing a book and you need a small reference map for people to be able to look at? Because like I know a lot of people out there still love that. I love it when I see it. So first, like ask yourself, what are you making the map for? And then scale and scope yourself from there. Because if you're only making a map for like a simple campaign or like a session or something like that, you don't have to go full on. Like you do not have to get down and be like, hey, I gotta like design this entire world, figure out what the tidal influences of the 5 moons around it are, and then like ask myself, you know, what happens because I decided all the minerals in the world turn the water pink. So what's that going to affect? Blah, blah blah. You don't have to do all that. Okay, scope your map for what the project and the end desired result is. The next question to ask yourself is, how's the map intended to be used? And what I mean by that is, what is the assumed use that the end user is going to be using that map, or what means, or sorry, yeah, gotta get my brain wired back here. What ends will this map support? Okay, this map is going to be the part of the means for the ends. Is it going to be used for navigation? Is it going to be used to communicate like the levels of, you know, like I had earlier there, air quality levels or something like that? Is it there to communicate populations? Is it there to communicate how to like defeat the coded cipher for a lock at the end of the adventure, based on the letters and numbers that you've put around the edges of it that your players have assumed are just there for quick grid referencing? Okay, maps can be used for a lot of things, and like I'm not even kidding about that last one. I mean, like, that's a clue that I've seen so many people overlook, and hopefully none of my friends who are going to be playing the mystery sort of games with me in the near future will remember this, who are watching. See you there. Anyways, yeah, there's the intended use, not just for the end user too, but like for you as like the game runner, as the GM, the storyteller, dungeon master, all that sort of stuff. How are you intending for it to be used as well? The next one is, who is making the map and what influences do they have? And what I mean by that is, you know, as a Socioclips here asked earlier, you know, are you getting it from the Cartographers Guild or the local barkeeper, and it's written on the back of a napkin? Okay, who's making the map? What's it made of? And what influences do they have? You know, like, are they a professional level map maker, or are they a just like some rando who's got a pen and paper and is going to scribble you out something real fast? Okay, and when I say what influences do they have, what do they think is important? Okay, like for example, if you ask somebody, hey, I need fast directions from point A to point B. Hey, if you ask somebody who's just there for the navigation part, like, yeah, you know, take 2 lefts and a right, you'll be there. But that 2 lefts and right might be ignoring all the danger, like you know, a bunch of pit traps and a falling roof or something like that. Okay, it's ignoring those because you just want the fastest route. Whereas somebody who's a little more conscious about danger would be like, look, you can go this route, 2 lefts and a right, but you'll probably die. If you go this route, it's 2 rights, a left, and then just go straight on. You'll get there. It'll take a little bit longer, but your chances of dying will be lower. And then there's cultural influences as well. So, you know, like, what do they think is important culturally that they may include on that map or leave off of that map because they don't think that it's something that you care about? Okay, for example, a map created by people from an arid environment may obsessively label locations where there is fresh water, known water traps, plants that retain water that can be tapped to be consumed, all that sort of stuff, but may leave off things like hills and um, anything but like the largest of gullies because they don't really care about that stuff. Um, Likewise, map to a treasure may be you know, it may be the classic, you know, like island with a mountain with a little dotted line leading up to an X, but you know, that's leaving out all the stuff that's between the beach and that X because it just wanted to show you the route. So those are things to think about. Now, next question: what information must be on the map? This is this one is brutal because on one hand, my GIS brain says, well, you have to have a scale bar, you have to have a key or a legend, you need to have borders, you need to have good labeling, you need blah, 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 and like this laundry list of things starts tumbling through my head. But the reality is that the only information that needs to be on the map is the information that was considered important by the person making it for the purpose that it was made for. So, for example, I flick back to this slide here, and we look at this beautiful Tang Dynasty Heaven and Earth map. Okay, the important information on this map was cities, rivers, and mountains, and their connections to the stars and planets. That was the important information that needed to be on that map. Okay, I skip back to this map here, the traveler map. The important information that had to be on this map was explaining all the different terrain types, what the symbols meant. So, you know, you've got the you know, like noble estate, the starport, towns, exotic terrain, that sort of thing. Okay, that was the important information that it wanted to convey, you know, as well as the data about the planet and trade and stuff like that. So, and of course, you know, like I go to this, come on, there we go. I go to the map I used for example of story, Golden Axe 2. You know, the important information on this map was telling you the general sort of terrain that you're going to be engaging in your side-scrolling beat 'em up adventure on. You know, village, forest, hills, ruins, underground or volcano cave adventure, and then punching up into through the fortress to battle on the top of it against Death Adder and under presumably this giant evil bat dude. So, there we go. So what's important is very subjective. Okay, but it's whatever the map was being made for, that's the important information. Okay, so do not get wrapped around the axle thinking, oh, I have to include all these conventional features. I have to make sure the space between everything is exact. It doesn't have to be there if that's not the purpose of that map. That information isn't important. Now, what information can or needs to be inferred from the map? So what I mean by that is that maps will like there's the obvious information a map gives, then there's the less obvious information that it gives, and these, pardon me, are things that you can read from a map based on the symbology that exists in addition to that key information. So pick on that Tang Dynasty map again. We can infer from this map that, you know, like there's obviously the heaven and earth parts, but we can also infer that these boundaries here make up the boundaries of the internal states of the dynasty. that's inferred information. It's not necessarily what the map is all about. The map is all about the connection of things on the Earth's surface with stars and planets. But it's information that we can infer out of it. Okay, information that we can infer out of the how to tell a story with a map. Okay, what sorts of biomes are we going to be going on? And yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, OrcaCon. Yeah, if you have questions for me, please type them out. Like fire them up in the chat. I want to see them. I want to answer them. Okay, information we can infer from the Chalt map. One is that there's a lot of stuff going on. Okay, but we can also infer that there are different conditions happening around different areas that are going to change how we adventure in it, because it's not strictly labeling things as like, oh, these are hills, this is swamps. It's showing it visually. Let's see your question. What mediums do you like to use for making maps, or would you like to explore? Okay, I love all sorts of mediums for making maps. I have made maps with string, like literally like different colors of yarn all tied together, that had like little sticks at the ends that told you which ends were supposed to be where, and sort of laid it out like a cool little spider web. I have made earth maps. So that's like when you actually like create a representation of the ground out of like dirt, twigs, and everything else like that on the ground for planning purposes. I did that with the army. That was a lot of fun. Not super useful for gaming contexts, but super fun. And of course, like the regular stuff, like all sorts of different papers and things like that. And to a lesser degree, I've also experimented a little bit with making maps out of different colored bits of plastic, and having it so you had like look through the light to figure stuff out. It didn't work out as well as I'd hoped it would, though. And as for exploring, I'm pretty much up to explore any form of medium for maps. Obviously, some mediums are more durable than others. For example, like the oldest paper map in the world is not in great shape, whereas the oldest extant map that we have left in the world is this thing, and it's come through its 2,500, 2,700 years pretty well. So that's actually something I may explore later. And there's all sorts of other mediums you can use to try to explore how to make maps or how to do writing and all that sort of stuff. For example, was it Sumeria or Babylon? I can't remember which one. Anyways, in Mesopotamia, they had writing cylinders. So it was like a cylinder. It had everything all written on the outside of it, and you'd roll it along clay, and it would actually like write out a message. Super handy. Easy to store and cool. Question here. So yeah, for mediums for maps, there's a lot of ones I want to explore. I'm probably going to explore clay next because I can get my hands on clay relatively easily. But for most people, the medium of the map is going to be something you're going to be describing to your player characters, and the actual medium you'll be handing to them will probably be paper or an electronic PDF, or a JPEG of what you've created, just because not everybody has time to experiment with all sorts of stuff. Like obviously time's constraint. And another question here: are there any resources you would recommend for understanding making worlds or maps? Really enjoyed reading a Magical Society guide to. Hang on a moment. Is it still here? Can't find it. So, there's a book I quite love, and it's called. Just let me confirm the title here. There's a book. It's available on Amazon. It's called How to Lie with Maps, and it's in its 3rd edition. And it is amazing, because the title's a little bit of a it's kind of playing around with you a little bit, but it's talking about how the choices that map makers make consciously or unconsciously, I'm just reading this Amazon thing, mean that every map inevitably presents only one of many possible stories about the places that it depicts. And this book is fantastic because it helps train your mind in looking at the different ways that maps convey information and the different messages that maps can convey that information by. And a classic example of maps conveying maps of the same place conveying different information would be if you were to create, for example, a map. Oh, I don't know. Let's see. Crime maps are a great example of maps that are telling a story, but it's a very specific story that ignores a lot of the other things behind it. So, like, for example, if you see a crime map, you're like, oh man, like those areas are filled with crime, we should avoid them, and like sort of like isolate them, you know, because like everyone hates crime. Crime's awful. Well, that map's not telling you why the crime's happening. It's not talking about the socioeconomic aspects of the area. It's not digging into the history of the place or anything else like that. It's simply telling one story that may influence decisions about that location afterwards. Oh, hang on a moment. Is this the book? Yes, that is the book right there. That's the one. Yeah, strongly recommend that book. It is fantastic. It's a good read, and it really gets your brain going. Other resources that I recommend, quite honestly, there's some really, really good fantasy and like science fiction map makers who do some streaming. Check out their streams and watch how they work. Another thing that I would recommend would be to pick up some just go to the bookstore and pick up some intro books to geography and things like that to get an idea about how not only like different types of landscapes, because I mean, I swear, if I see one more river that comes out of the mountains, flows almost perfectly straight through the plains, and then enters into the sea without forming a delta or anything else like that, I will probably scream. So yeah, like pick up a basic book about geography, read through it, familiarize yourself with it, and your maps will immediately start getting better because you'll have knowledge of so many more types and styles of terrain to use. And on top of that, that will also reinforce and expand your ability to tell stories, challenge your players, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot that's what I would recommend as far as books. So Inferred from the map. Now, next up, the next question is, how are you going to drive story, adventure, or pace with the map? And this sort of ties into the first one. What are you making the map for? But it also brings it into a more sharper focus. And I think it needs that sharper focus. And the reason I think that is because if I flip back here, if I look at this map, okay, this is a beautiful map. This is a fantastic world map. This map does not drive story or adventure or pace particularly well. It's a whole world. There's no real focus to it narratively. It's not listing any adventure locations. Pardon me. And it's not driving pace beyond time of travel. So it's great for reference. Let's see here. How I feel about Conlangs and maps. Okay, so Conlangs, for people who aren't aware of that, Conlangs are artificial and made up languages. So things like Tolkien's Elven, Dwarven, Klingon, all that sort of stuff. Those are Conlangs. And I am perfectly fine about Conlangs on maps, provided A, you have your own like key to decipher them, and B, that you, if you're going to do that, be ready for your players to start asking questions and start trying to find out how to interpret the information that's on there themselves. Because that sort of thing can move very quickly from being just like nice decoration to something that may actually be driving aspects of your story, and actually can drive aspects of your story really well. You actually sort of jumped the gun on that one a little bit, and that's fantastic. Because that falls into like things written on maps. But then I move forward. Where is it? Here we go. So sorry, back onto driving story, and I'll be back onto that Conlang thing in a moment. This map, on the other hand, when compared to the last one, it's a smaller area, but this map is driving the story, adventure, and pace a lot more effectively because it's reinforcing the mechanics of the game. So you've got the hex crawl aspect, you have the points of interest, event, and adventure locations on the map as well. And so you can really dig into it, and you can really get in and be like, oh, hey, wow, like this is cool. We need to look into this more. This is a place we're going to be going. You're traveling along it. The travel is more immediate and less fast travel feeling because this map is making you actually go through all the hexes if you're using those rules. Same thing with this map here. This map is a story by itself. And now for Conlangs, that sort of thing, that for me, that falls under like information that must be on the map and what the intended uses are as well. Because when you start adding Conlangs onto things, so we start adding like artificial languages, the first big thing that does is that's going to change the cultural influences that are going into that map, especially if it's a non-human language that you're using. And if you're not using it to drive story or like to do that sort of stuff, dial it back. Because if you start using it a lot, your players are going to start associating that with it being important. And if you're not ready for it to be important, or if you're not ready for it to be a big part of your adventure and how everything's going to spool out, then it is not going to be a great experience for anybody, because your players are going to get frustrated. They can't get information, and you're going to get frustrated because you had your layout all set and ready to go, but now you're stuck trying to explain what this language means and all that sort of thing. So come into it with a plan. And that is very much a plan the dive the plan operation. So if you're including it, be ready to use it, be ready to provide interpretation for it, be ready for your players to get really interested in it if it starts tying into the adventures. Now, the next one, what lies is the map telling and how bad are they? So yesterday, I quoted one of my geography professors from college. The first thing that he told us in our intro to cartography course was every map is lying. The question is, what is the map lying about, and how much are they lying about it? And that is still absolutely true. All maps are lying about something. It's just a matter of trying to figure out what they're lying about. So we're going to flip back and we're going to look through some of these maps and look about what they're lying about. Okay, so where are we? Go back one more. Okay, so what are these maps lying about? Well, this map, the map directly above my head right now, it's lying about topography. It's got some great information about what's going on under the water, less information about what's going on land. The tube map is completely lying about space. It doesn't care about space in any way, shape, or form. It also doesn't care about the actual like directionality and shapes of the tunnels, because none of those tubes are perfectly straight. There are bends in them. So it's lying about that. The TO map is lying about pretty much everything. There is no single massive set of rivers that completely breaks Africa off from Asia, that merge seamlessly into the Mediterranean. It's lying about the shapes of everything. It's missing a bunch of continents because obviously it was made before Europeans were aware those other continents were actually there, outside of theory. And yeah, so it's telling a ton of lies. Oh, there we go. So the heat map over my shoulder here, it is telling lies about the shape of the planet. It's a Mercator projection. Greenland isn't that big. Neither is Europe. Africa dramatically larger than that. So it's telling all sorts of lies. The wave map or the Marshall Islands stick map, it doesn't even care about the shape of land. Or it's a complete abstraction of everything. Oh, yeah. Okay, this map, the lies it's telling, well, it is not telling us a lot about locations. It's also a Mercator projection, so it's probably lying to us about spatial a little bit. These maps are just lying about everything. Again, everything but the locations is all made up there. Okay, so all these maps are all telling a lie about one thing or another. Like this map, yeah, I'm pretty sure coastlines are not hexagonal. Hey, pretty sure the world's bigger than that. Hey, but I think everybody gets the picture now. Okay, so when you're making a map, ask yourself, like, wow, like what kind of map, like what kind of lies are these maps telling? How big are the lies that they're telling? And then ask yourself, how will they affect my game? Like, how will they affect the end user? Because it could be something minor, like we're used to maps lying about what the ground is shaped like and all that sort of stuff. So those aren't huge things, but when they start lying about other things, it could cause problems. Or you could also use it to drive story and adventure. As I mentioned earlier, you could have a map that's 200 years out of date. 200 years is a long time. A lot of things change, and so that may just be an adventure in of itself. And that brings us up to final thoughts and questions. So on the final thought side of it, so I'm going to stop sharing here. So you can all see my giant smiling face and stop having like two of me on the screen at once. It's a little freaky. Oh, here we go. Question. You mentioned rivers being a common mistake on maps. What are some other common topographic errors to avoid? So rivers seldom run straight. They almost always wind. They almost deltas are a thing. Depending on the type of world that you're making, the way that the mountains are going to form or not form on it, that can get a little bit wild, because you'll see like a lot of fantasy maps are like, yeah, spiral mountains, and they'll be like, this is a natural landform, and you're like, that's not how mountains form at all. What's going on? Like, what are the underlying aspects of your world that is making this happen? What are some other things? Using colors that are too close to each other, that makes the map hard to read. That's a big one. I'd also say that the overuse of symbology can make a map pretty unreadable pretty quick as well. For example, if you're making a map of a swamp, you don't have to have a little swamp symbol over absolutely every part of the swamp. You can say like, this whole place is swamp, and call it a day. Yeah, there's I would say with that particular question, I would actually refer you to like look up some of the websites and stuff like that cover like topographic map design, and check out their common errors things, because there's a lot of them, and not all of them are necessarily things that you're going to run into when you're making maps for a game or something like that. But they're good to know, because your maps will look better for them. I would also say that the placement of map keys and legends, compass roses, and annotation information tend to be really bad ones, because you have to try to drop those in areas where there isn't key information, or where they won't overshadow key information as well. Got a comment here from the Dapper streamer. Now I'm imagining an RPG campaign where the inviting incident is the discovery of a well-known, generally accepted map of the world. Region is deliberately inaccurate to facilitate the impartial control of the population. Yeah. Oh, sorry, inciting incident. Yeah, that's actually a thing. That is a thing that is very real, and that actually happens. Unfortunately, it is yeah. Whoa. People do actually use maps. It's called spatial violence, and it is absolutely used to communicate ideas and concepts that are harmful to one group but beneficial to another group. And it is wild. A great example of it is actually the what's a quick example that people would recognize? Sorry, I'm just trying to think here. The Malvinas Islands, also known as the Falklands. That is a oh, got a great comment there. That's a good point about where the legend is from New Zealand once. Everyone believes she's from a real place because NZ was covered by a logo on the map they provided. Oh wow, that's brutal. Oh, that's rough. Yeah. Sorry, I'm reading that comment, and I'm just, it is that is a whole bunch of unfortunate all at once. Wow. Yeah, so spatial violence, it is a thing. And it is examples are for example, as I was saying, Argentina labels the Falkland Islands as the Malvinas as part of their ongoing conflict with the United Kingdom over the ownership of those islands. What's it in Canada here? We're bad for claiming areas of First Nations land using maps to prove whose it is, and they're maps that like we the settlers have created. And you'll find this all over the world. China, for example, claims most of the South China Sea and has actually been like expanding their dominion over it. Yeah, it's erasure through layout. Absolutely. That is a great that's a great example of what I'm talking about. So let's see here. Slight oversight by the map makers. I mean, you talked about the distortion the standard map does too, right? I mean, it's drawn Africa is barely. Yeah, exactly. So distortion happens. That's why I was talking about different projections, and projections are how we flatten out the Earth. Different projections allow for better navigation. Like for example, the Mercator projection, which I bash a lot, and so do a lot of other people who are minded in this sort of stuff. It was designed for point-to-point navigation is what it was made for, and that point-to-point navigation is accurate. The problem is that it stretches everything out on the outsides of things, so you end up with like distorted Africa, distorted Greenland, all that sort of stuff. Whereas a map that might be more accurate, like the Gall Peters or a similar projection like that, it falls apart when it comes to actually navigating because it's having trouble with space and time in its own special way. So yeah, it is a mess. Let's see here. Talking about sources. Yeah. Talk about the way it plays. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like we totally use maps to get things more our way. And it can be very distressing, especially the people that are being victimized by it. Yeah, brilliant maps for curious minds. Yeah, that's a good one. That's why I'll never buy a curved monitor. Oh, that's fantastic. All right, 15 minutes late. Yeah, if you got any, we are now into the question period. Like the presentation has been wrapped up. I'll say like on the final thoughts side of things, from me, that the key takeaway that I want everybody to have from this is that um a map doesn't just have to be spatial information, that a map can very, very much be any number of other things and can convey a lot of other types of information. And that just because it's conveying that information doesn't make it detrimental to your game or to the design or make it less of a map. Okay? All it's doing is making the map more immediately applicable to what you're actually doing. And I think that if that can be your big takeaway from this, that will be fantastic to me, because that means that you're going to be looking at maps in different ways. You're going to be looking at maps in ways that facilitate a better and deeper understanding of what maps can do. Oh, there we go. Sorry, just trying to adjust myself to sit a bit more comfortably here. And that you'll also be able to functionally expedite your games and stories. So that is what I would like everyone to take out of this. And I mean, absolutely, please, if you have any more questions, fire them up. There's no such, well, sorry, there are bad questions, but so far as an audience, you've been really fantastic at asking good ones. So yeah, I definitely want to see more of these great questions from everybody. Yeah, here we go. When creating maps for D&D campaigns, is there an optimal distance that a hex should represent? Example, 1 hour of travel versus 1 day of travel. Would you suggest generating maps from regional and macro to regional? Head across the stream. Yeah, actually, I haven't covered that already. So that falls under scaling. And to be honest, the optimal distance, or like the way that you want to approach that, is going to be dictated entirely by what you are going to be planning to use that map for. So for example, if you are going to be using it for a regular adventure or something like that, in a relatively small space, yeah, it might just be 1 hour of travel. But with that time, set it as 1 hour of travel by foot, horse, flight, whatever. You have to add an extra caveat to that, because that's going to help define your space a little bit better and what can happen in that space. As for regional to macro or macro to regional, my preference is the is the regional to macro. I like to start in a relatively small area, and from there I like to expand outwards. And when I do, and in doing that, I find that it just makes things work a lot better. Just because, as I said, I did mention this part earlier, you have a bump of confidence from the initial creation. You're like, yeah, I made something. And so you have that bump of creativity to keep on going. And then you also have sorry, I keep looking down here. I'm reading the next comment here. You also have the skeleton area around it to expand it, which I think is important. So let's see. Next, taking time to give. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to have been able to give this information out. I love maps. I love mapping. Obviously, I do it for a job, and I think they can do a lot more for people. So next one, I like the idea of thinking about the lies map tell. I guess you're thinking about what is included and why, and what is excluded. Real maps betray biases of creatures in that way, and it's interesting to think about using that to support a narrative that you're creating in game. Like, what if in Skyrim your map were different depending on whether or not you sided with Imperial or not? Yeah, like that would be awesome. Like that's what I'm talking. Like that's what I'm talking about. Is that sort of like what happens if you aren't on side with one particular group, and what happens when you start running into errors on your map or biases on your map because some things weren't included. Comment here, this was great, and also an excellent follow-up to your session yesterday. Thank you. Yeah, that was actually why I was so specific that I wanted to do this one separately, because last year when I taught this, when I ran this ran a workshop on world design, I found that the map part actually started getting out of control pretty quick, and I realized that it really needed to be its own animal, and so I made it its own animal, and it worked out so much better because I was actually able to get into the details that I wanted to get into last time that I couldn't because I had time constraints. And now I'm just like, yeah, like I've been able to cover this. I got into some of this weird stuff that I wanted to talk about. And it's awesome. I love it. It's great. Yeah, thank you. Yep. I'm now a map skeptic. I no longer trust any maps. Broadly speaking, that's not a bad position. Maps, you should absolutely question maps when you run into them, because you never know what somebody has decided to do with it, has decided to run with on these things, and it just it can get really wild real quick. So yeah, got another one here. There's this box starting with stellar cartography. It's clean along the nice. Maps, space, great illustration, all the different. Yeah, there have been some games that have done an amazing job at, and not just some games, but also like some franchises that have done a fantastic job with doing their with creating more, and it's great, but not a lot of groups do that. Like, for example, and this is something I brought up before, like with Dungeons and Dragons, all the maps we have for all the worlds are human centric. They list other groups as being like afterthoughts almost. And it's brutal. But yeah, it's where it's at, unfortunately. And yeah, it's great. Yeah, the ways you can illustrate how different groups see the world, it's fantastic. All right, so we got 5 minutes left. Would you just leave space for future expansion? Yes and no. This question comes up a lot, and the reason I say yes and no is because in my experience, I have not run into a lot of people who actually use the whole map. At all. Like it's not something that they've done. Like most people don't use the whole world. And so leaving blank patches on a map to explore down the road, to me generally seems like a bit of a pointless endeavor. Likewise, I haven't seen any instances ever where an entire world is so perfectly described that there isn't space to like take a Sharpie and draw something new in. And I covered this a bit yesterday, and that just because an area is on a map and it says like the forest of, I don't know, sharp things to go right for your eyes, just because that's a huge part of your map doesn't mean that you can't draw something in there and say that it's there. The only caveat that I add to that is that if you're adding new things, you need to pay attention to time and integration, because you want to make sure that these new things, if they're brand new, it's generally pretty easy. If you want to make them older and more established, that involves a little bit of retcon work, and you need to pay attention to that sort of stuff when it's going down. So yeah, that's why I say it's like, you can if you want to. I don't really see a giant point in it. And if you're building your map regionally, like as you need it, you're essentially leaving a lot of the map blank or minimally developed to start with, which sort of solves that problem in of itself, because you're not burning effort creating areas that people aren't using. So yeah, so we got like 3 and a bit minutes left. Is there any last questions anyone have? Because if not, this has been a fantastic workshop. It's been a fantastic chat. And it has been yeah, just outstanding overall. I've really enjoyed being able to give this presentation to you. I'll take this last couple minutes then here to say thank you very much to Donna and the staff at OrcaCon, to James, who has been like absolutely killing it on the IT side of it, like keeping all this sort of stuff running. And to all the people that have been involved. I was on a great panel yesterday. Absolutely watch the VOD of it's talking about gaming in the pandemic world. And thank you so much for supporting OrcaCon, because we weren't all able to get together this year, and we'll be hopefully, next year, we'll all have our shots. We'll all be able to get back together again and be able to see all of you awesome people down in Seattle, and have and like actually do this in person. You can watch me animatedly wave my arms around, point at things on maps I'll have printed out, and all that sort of good stuff. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to follow OrcaCon on Twitter. Give them toss them at least a follow on here, because every little bit helps. And OrcaCon is not over. There are still lots of games going on. There's still some more panel workshop sort of stuff going on tomorrow. So get in on those games, watch those other presentations, watch those other workshops, learn, enjoy, comment, all that sort of fun stuff. And also pick up a sweet OrcaCon shirt. There's like a site set up. I think it was like higher up in the comments there. They've got some really cool shirts, because like unfortunately right now we can't get the mugs. Like I got the mug from last year. It's awesome. It's a great mug. So yeah, help support OrcaCon moving forwards. And that's like, buy some merch, all that sort of good stuff. And all I can say past that is thank you very much for watching. Take care, stay safe, and don't take unnecessary risks, because we're not out of all this sort of stuff yet. And I want to be able to do this live next year, as opposed to sitting in my den, which I'm currently hiding with this elaborate background. So have a great night, everybody, and take care.